So thank you for all who stayed until the end. It only gets better. As you all know, experiments are fun, except that you can't experiment with taxes, except that you can, as we will show in a minute. But as Simen Markussen will present the paper on very timely, ongoing, or hopefully ongoing Norwegian experiment. But thank you for stepping in at last minute with a short notice, and thank you for being here. But the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to present a paper which is not yet very well written. I apologize to my discussants that they have got a mess of a document, but it is what it is. Everything is sort of work in progress. So this is about a Norwegian tax experiment. It's written together with Marie Bjørneby. She's in the Ministry of Finance, and I'm working at the Frisch Center in Oslo. And the research group also consists of 7 other people. We have from the University of Oslo, from the University of Chicago, and from the Frisch Center. So it's a broad group of people. And let me just jump straight into the experiment. What is this about? So this is an experiment which is not yet decided. I'm going to tell you a bit more of that in a minute. It's planned as a randomized experiment where 8% of all Norwegian taxpayers aged 20 to 35 face a modified tax system. And that tax system contains a tax allowance for earned income, which is a feature of a tax system that many countries have, but we don't. And it's sizable. It's 125,000 NOK, or 10,700 euros. It used to be more euros. The currency is weak. And it reduces tax on labor income of up to 27,500 Norwegian crowns, or 2,350 euros per year. So it's sizable. You can, that's sort of the maximum gain or maximum tax reduction you can have. And it's planned to last for 5 years. And when I say it's not yet decided, there's been a process, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about it, but it's in the budget. It's proposed by the government, and the budget is, as we speak, negotiated upon. But as you all know, I mean, we have a minority government, and there are 5 parties. It's actually called the Tutti Frutti Coalition. And they are going to agree on this budget, and they are negotiating on a number of things. And of course, this might fall out in a late night hour. We don't know, right? And we are not going to know until early December. And it's going to start from January 1st. So we are sort of forced to work as if everything goes through. So it's all being planned as we speak. But it might be stopped. But then, of course, this article is going to be. Then I don't know what. Then we have to have a talk. What we do, we'll see. Okay, so let's then look at just sort of the tax. We can start with the tax schedule. So this graph illustrates the Norwegian tax system, at least for workers with up to 700,000 NOK in earnings. And the blue line is sort of the normal system, while the red line is the one for those who are in the treatment group. And for the first 100,000 you earn, you don't pay taxes at all, and then you start paying a little bit. And then, from a bit more than 200, there is a sort of higher tax bracket, so 22%, that kicks in. Then you see the blue line start to increase. But if you then have this tax allowance for earned income, you see that you will sort of continue at this lower marginal rate for another 125,000. All the way until you see the kink around 340,000. And then what happens is that the tax allowance is gradually phased out, such that when you reach 700,000, you will be treated, there's no difference between the treatment and control group. So this means that the effect, so this is gonna depend on where you are in the income distribution. So for those earning less than 215, and there is a, you're gonna, the participation tax rate is gonna be increased, it's gonna be decreased. If you do nothing, if you do not change your labor supply, you will not be affected. But the incentive to enter the labor market to take a job will be stronger. Then we have this sort of middle region where you both experience a lower average tax rate and a lower marginal tax rate. So in that, for that group, the incentives or the sort of the expected behavioral effects are ambiguous. Right? You get a positive labor supply effect from a reduced marginal tax rate, but you also get an income effect from a lower average tax rate. And then, after the kink in the red line, you will have both a reduced average tax rate and a reduced marginal tax rate. So the economic theory is sort of crystal clear that in that region, labor supply should go down, right? So what would be the total effect of this? It's a little bit hard to say, right? At least not unless we have an experiment. So in this presentation, I'm first gonna go through, I mean, obviously we don't have any results. That's pretty clear, right? So I'm gonna go through the background, and I'm gonna talk a little bit or a lot about the process behind, how it started, how we have been working and planning, and then I'm gonna go through the experiment in the end, how it's gonna play out, what we're gonna do, and yeah, at least for sort of the first months of the experiment. All right? Background. So this guy, this very serious guy, he's the, I don't know the English term, we call it riksrevisor, that be like the national auditor, right? He's auditing the parliament. And he has been very concerned that we have a massive rise in young people receiving disability insurance. And we have challenges with sort of falling or at least non-increasing employment rates among the young. Compared to, for example, other Nordic countries, Norway has done poorer when it comes to employment over the last 20 years, I would say. So when I studied, I usually said it, when I was a student, which I have to admit is some years ago, we always learned that Norway was sort of the champion of Europe when it comes to employment. And gradually we have been stepping down. It's not that we are doing poorly, but we are no longer the best. We are maybe on 6th, 7th, something like that. We are behind Sweden, which is maybe the worst. So this has been a challenge, maybe not that part with Sweden, but the rest of it. And we also see that non-participation, standing outside the labor market, seems to be more absorbing than before. It's gradually been more and more sorted towards people with low skills. It's been concentrated among people with receiving health-related benefits. You can ask whether that's because of health or because of the system. That's hard to know. But at least there's been some changing patterns over the time, which has raised concerns. And the tax allowance is sort of one way to approach this. Right? I mean, among economists and others, there is not even agreement whether sort of effort should be put in on the supply side or on the demand side in the labor market. We don't know. But this is going to sort of address that question in the sense that we are doing something very clearly on the supply side, trying to affect labor supply using the tax system. And the tax allowance for earned income is a feature that is included in many countries' tax systems, but that we do not have. And it has been proposed in several rounds. It was proposed by a conservative government led by Erna Solberg in 2021. And it's also been proposed by an expert tax commission later in 2022 in different forms, I have to say, and for different groups, but still. And it has also been discussed by other public commissions, but not been suggested. So we had, at that time, a couple of years ago, 2 commissions. One of them concluded that this was a good idea. The other that it was not a good idea, in the sense that it was not cost efficient. We wanted to recommend more targeted policies. And also the knowledge regarding behavioral responses is quite diverging, I would say. We have been hearing about the Finnish basic income experiment, for example, which basically finds no effects, at least that's how I read it. But we also have other studies finding that people are quite responsive to incentives. It's not that easy to know. And it's also, over the last years, we have seen a lot of new evidence on behavioral responses from tax changes, which maybe takes income effects more seriously than we've been used to doing, and which also concludes that behavioral responses might be much stronger than we thought. That's not necessarily a good thing when it comes to tax allowance for earned income, because here, when we have a phase out like we have here, you will have income and substitution effects going the same way and not opposite ways, which is often the case, such that the consequence might be that the reductions in labor supply in the phase-out period is stronger than we hope for, I would say. Yeah. So we'll see. That makes it more important to test it. Okay, so how did this start? So I told you about a couple of political commissions, and it's also post-COVID. There was also a lot of evaluation work that's been going on, concluding that we need more experiments in the public sector. And Erik here, which is from the Ministry of Finance, has been sort of a key to that process, has been working on sort of pushing, at least that's my interpretation, the use of randomized trials in the Norwegian public sector, in many places. And this very specific experiment was first mentioned in the budget for 2024. But it was just a few sentences, and I'm not sure that a lot of people actually read it and noticed. But it was sort of mentioned in the sense that it was given. The Ministry of Finance said that they want to do this, so they have, by putting this in the budget, they have some leeway to do some work on it, I guess. And what they did was to after a while contract with a group of researchers, and we started on probably I did a lot of work before that, but I don't have the full overview. And then we started on a pre-study. And the first thing we did was to obtain some kind of quantitative predictions. So I mean, a tax allowance like this is not it's not a given object. You don't know it. You know the principles. It's going to be a part of the tax system which gives you an allowance for earned income and not for benefits. But how big should it be? When should it start? How should it be phased out? How fast should it be phased out? There's a lot of questions, right? That you have to look into. So we started by trying to obtain some quantitative predictions. What kind of responses could we actually expect? And how could we use data to learn about this? And that was sort of the first part. And the second part was to analyze to do power analysis, to try to look into different research designs and see, well, how much precision would we get from different designs. And in the end, provide some recommendations. And I'm going to take you a little bit through these different steps, since I don't have the results, right? So, okay, first let's look at how we did this, the analysis of expected behavioral responses. So we did this using data. So we started out with the full population data for Norway for all people aged 20 to 35 in 2022. And we then used data for income and benefits, and number of children, education, participation, etc., etc. So all relevant components. And we tried to apply the existing tax rules to estimate average and marginal tax rates in the current system. And so first we estimate the average tax rates, then we find the marginal tax rates by simply increasing income by, say, 1,000 kroner, and then do all these earnings tests on different benefits and study support, etc., that makes marginal taxes much more complicated than you sort of believe before you look into it. Because we want to then assess the effective marginal tax rates as they are, and not just what follows from the tax system, but also what follows from for example, earnings test in a social security system. And as you probably know, I guess it's the same in your countries, that for a lot of people, average or the marginal tax rates might very well be 80%, 90% for a lot of people, because they lose a lot of benefits when they start working. And then we also find the participation tax rates, and in order to do that, you simply have to do some guesswork, in the sense that we have to guess what would these persons earn if they enter the labor market. And you can do that fancy and you can do that simple, but you have to guess anyhow. And what we basically did was to do a matching exercise. So we compared them to similar people, the same age and similar education, etc. And then we gave them 80% of mean income in their peer group. So that was what we did. You can do it in a different way. And then we calculate taxes, and from that you can find the participation tax rate. And then for every sort of variety of the tax allowance, you can repeat these steps, and you can calculate the average marginal tax rate and the participation tax rate, and how it changes with different sizes of the tax allowance. And then you can apply a labor supply model on this to quantify the responses. So then we have to put up sort of a parameterized labor supply model. We have to add some elasticities for the different responses. And we can calculate basically, or simulate the income effect, the substitution effect, and the participation effect. And again, this is clearly guesswork, but at least it's sort of more educated guesswork than just putting the finger up in the air. So that's sort of the exercise we went through. And then from doing this, you see that there are clearly some very hard trade-offs when you have to when designing such a tax allowance. If you have a larger tax allowance, that gives you higher participation effects, clearly, but it's also much more expensive. And a rapid phase-out, that will give you lower fiscal costs, it will give you more redistribution, but it also gives a stronger substitution effect, but among fewer people. So if you have a long phase out, it will typically be, well, then you have smaller effects on those who are affected, but there are much more people that are subject to that phase out. So there's a trade-off between these things. And a rapid phase out will also result in that you have an income effect among fewer people. So that all these things are sort of, I mean, they're not that easy to, or let me put it the other way. In order to quantify these mechanisms, you need data, because you need the underlying data distribution in addition to a model. Okay, I can show you. In the end, we ended up with an alternative which is sort of quite targeted towards low and middle income. It's a quite, at least to Norwegian standards and where we started, it's a quite large tax allowance with a rapid phase out. It's going to be phased out by 40%, meaning that for every krone you earn above 335,000, you lose 40% of that krona in the allowance, and that 40% is taxed by a rate of 22%. So it gives you an increased marginal effective tax rate of 9 percentage points, which is quite a lot, right? And this table, it provides some of the sort of main expected changes. And we see that the participation rate, the fraction with positive labor income, is expected to increase by 0.8 percentage points, which, I don't know, do you think that is that small or is it big? Huh? To say? It's about half, is almost half the employment goal of the Norwegian government. In that sense, it's not that small. But maybe it's optimistic. That could be. Might very well be that the true effects are smaller. We don't know. We find average labor earnings are expected to increase by a quite small amount. 1,700 Norwegian kroner. But behind that number, there's quite large effects. There are large positive effects for low earners, and also quite substantial negative effect for higher earners. And it's a fairly positive, if you look at the difference between the fiscal effect without and including behavioral responses, there's a quite positive gain. But to the right, there is a column where we sort of add a more pessimistic scenario regarding the behavioral effects. Including, meaning that we have weaker employment effects and stronger effects on the intensive margin. And then this tax allowance is not a very good idea, I would say. So this is highly dependent on how it on these parameters. At least whether I would recommend it. All right. Then we came to the part on how to design the experiment. And several of you have been talking about the legal requirements, and we also came to that. We met those quite hard last fall. And in Norway, we do not have a sort of trial or experiment legislation that covers this experiment. Within that legislation, it's possible to do some local adaptations of treatments or services, but this was at least considered by the Minister of Finance to be too big and sort of outside the scope of the trial legislation we had. So we needed sort of an explicit legal basis for this experiment. And then, as I think you said, we met sort of the same problem, that this is in a sense unconstitutional, right? Because it simply violates the general principle of equal treatment. And in order to justify an equal treatment, you need some good arguments. So first of all, you need a reasonable justification. And that justification is the need for knowledge. So that's sort of formally how it's motivated by the ministry, that we need this knowledge, and that's why, and that's sort of the argument enabled to avoid unequal treatment. And then the second requirement is that the design need to be what you can call proportionate, or in other words, there should be no other way to achieve the same goal. So if it's possible to get this knowledge in a different way, that it's less controversial or simpler or involves less unequal treatment, then that should be chosen. Right? Which I think is sort of a reasonable requirement. So our job was then to see, is it possible to learn the same at a lower cost? And what we did then was to consider other options that did not involve randomization. Could we learn the same? Right? So one of them, because at that point we had a center party government, which are more than average concerned with the rural parts of Norway. And so we consider the possibility of providing this tax allowance to all, or to some of the rural municipalities with low employment rates. But in practice this was very hard. So the expected effects are fairly small, and the differences between these municipalities and others, and the time trends, etc., are so big that it's just not possible. But the second approach was more promising. That, of course, I mean, very often we do not do RCTs. We study reforms in other way, using natural experiments. So why couldn't we just, for example, provide this tax allowance to a specific age range and study that age discontinuity, for example? So we had to sort of go into that a bit seriously and try to discuss and test whether that was possible. And I think the main point here is that kind of strategy will require more assumptions. You're not coming around that, in the sense that you will need to do some kind of assumption saying that, for example, age effects across cohorts are the same, time effects across cohorts are the same, or similar. Some kind of parallel trend assumption you will need to do. And those assumptions are generally not testable. So that, and then what we tried to do was sort of to quantify that kind of design uncertainty that comes with such a research design. And what we found was that uncertainty was sort of the same size as the expected effects. It was not on average or in expected terms biased in any sense. It was sort of an unbiased estimator, but it's just that you get some uncertainty together with the results that are impossible to detect, impossible to quantify. It doesn't relate to sort of the same statistical laws. So we conclude that the uncertainty in the end of the day would be very large, that you wouldn't be able to conclude the same kind of security that this had an effect. And then we also had to look into different designs involving randomization. And then you can randomize on municipalities, you can randomize on local labor markets, you can randomize on individuals. And then you can use more traditional power calculations. And I mean, there's no wonder that the individual randomization gives you the best statistical precision, but also to randomizing on, for example, municipalities, also have some benefits in the sense that you can, for example, be informed on equilibrium effects. But when we compared this, our conclusion was that we would need, for the first, in order to get reasonable power on municipality level, you would need that much bigger experiment than we have designed here. You would need to involve almost all the municipalities. So it would be much more costly, much bigger, and the precision would still be much lower. So we concluded that was not a good idea. And we'll later also be looking into these sort of mixed designs, like we talked about here several times, where you can sort of have varying treatment intensities across regions, for example. That would, at least in theory, be the best of both worlds. Possible to say something about the equilibrium effects. But our conclusion is that we do actually not have power to do it in a reasonable way, to be well informed. For several reasons. The regions are not that well defined. Then you need to look into to isolate the experiment to different labor market regions, which are not that isolated when it comes to the end, and particularly not in this age group, young people moving around. So it's not that easy to sort of isolate separate islands in practice. And we also don't think like within the budget we don't have enough power to actually learn enough to separate or to learn enough on the equilibrium effect that it's sort of worth the risk. So we didn't dare to do that. And instead ended up with individual randomization. It has weaknesses and pros and cons, clearly. It was not an easy decision. All right. So in the end, what we suggested was to do, actually we suggested to do 2 or 3 different treatments, but it ended up being 1. And with 100,000 people receiving it. And that is, we think we will then have confidence intervals for the participation rate on around 0.2 percentage points. And for earnings, a bit less than 2,000 Norwegian kroner. Which is quite good, I think. But there are some problems with it, which I'm coming to in the end. Okay, one important thing, which I didn't say here, is that from these power calculations, you also see that the more we are stratifying this randomization routine on small cells, where we put together people with very similar earnings histories and then do randomization in small cells. And of course, the more recent information we can use, the better. And so what we in practice are using is income in 2025 including September. That's sort of the best we could do. The draw was actually done yesterday. So it's all right. So after a long process, we handed this over before Christmas, and then was some internal processes in the Ministry of Finance, and we got a new finance minister, and he was visiting Trump, and it took a lot of time. But in the end, in May 2025, this proposal was actually put out on a public hearing. So the law proposal and sort of the experiment was made public on a press conference or a seminar. It became a very intense public debate on different things, both on tax allowance for earned income or sort of on the treatment, which is controversial. Some politicians are certain that it works, others are certain that it don't. It was a debate on experimenting with taxes, which is controversial, and whether that was okay. And it was debate on the proposed experiment, whether this was a good experiment or not. There was a lot of discussions and different sort of pathways that took. But there was a broad hearing up to August the 1st, and then the Ministry of Finance was sort of summarizing all the comments from different organizations and institutions, etc., concluded that it was mostly positive, and it was included in the budget for 2026, with not many modifications. All right. There's also been not much, but a little bit discussion on research ethics. It's been some discussions on that. But most of it has been sort of on the whether it's okay to randomize with such a big amount of money, to give people sort of a tax relief of this size, but on random. That's been sort of the main discussion. And then, but we also have a responsibility to discuss a lot of different ethical topics. And what we perhaps have spent most time on is, for example, the question of consent. Should people actively consent to take part in the experiment? Or should they be able to have some kind of reservation right to say that, well, I will not take part in the experiment? I mean, the main rule in research, at least in Norway, is that there should be some kind of consent. And we concluded in the research group that we did want to have a passive consent, that people should be able to reserve themselves from participating. But in the end, that's not been the case. So in the end, there's no kind of reservation right. People are included in this experiment, either they want to or not. And we've also been discussing a lot of this, like whether there could be any negative effects for non-winners, or that people could be disappointed, that could be harmful for them. Whether it concerns trust and confidence in the tax authorities, a lot of different questions. It's very hard to answer a lot of these questions. I mean, you can discuss it back and forth, but it's hard to know. We're gonna try to sort of assess some of the critical points we are adding some surveys to this experiment. We try to ask people about this. We're going to look into confidence and disappointment, etc., by investigating it. Yeah, it's sort of how it is. Okay, let me spend my last minutes on a couple of slides describing what's going to happen. So the aim is to learn about labor supply responses to taxes. And I mean, for people to respond, they need to change their beliefs, right? They need to understand that there are something happening, that they are facing different taxes. So we need a change in perceived taxes. And it sounds maybe silly, but it's not that easy to sort of, I mean, do you know what your marginal tax is? It's not that easy, right? When you look into it, this is complicated stuff. I really doubt that most people know these things. Maybe they have some kind of hunch, but it's not that easy to know. So we need to inform them. Maybe if you introduce a tax allowance like this and you let time fly, and after 10 years, maybe they have a correct hunch. But we need that to happen quite quick, because we have a time-limited experiment. So we need to inform them quite strongly. So what we do is that we're going to create an information treatment that informs people of their marginal tax rate and their participation tax rate. So what happens is that you get 16th of December, you're going to receive, or Norwegians going to receive, an email and an SMS saying that their tax card, the annual tax card, is ready. Log in, and there is an experiment going on this year if you are in the target group. And then when you log in, you will have sort of a banner where you can enter, and we know which people entered or not. And there they will be informed about whether they received this or not. And they will also be informed about their marginal tax rate and their participation tax rate. So we use the tax card calculations to inform them about what they would earn in net income if they earn 1,000, 100,000, and 400,000 or 300,000 more. This is a little bit harder for those with benefits, so they're going to get some examples instead, but same idea, basically. So they're going to be informed about this. But then we get the problem that, what about the control group? They are not informed. So what do we estimate the effect of? Is it the taxes or is it information? So then the remaining 1.2 million people in the control group, they are divided in half. So half of them is going to get the same information. That means same type of information but with different numbers, because their marginal taxes are going to be different. Right? Such that we can sort of try to isolate the effect of information by comparing the two control groups, and then the effect of the taxes by comparing the informed group with the recipients. All right. So in the end, this is then the sort of the timeline. So then November the 3rd, that was yesterday, the draw was made. It was based on a seed that was realized yesterday from Oslo Stock Exchange. And 8% of the 1.3 million people were put in the treatment group, and then the rest in the two different control groups. During November, around 30,000 people is going to be surveyed from Statistics Norway, where we ask them about their attitudes and beliefs regarding the tax system and their own taxes. How much do they think they pay in taxes, etc. Then, as I said, December 16th, we're going to disclosure the outcome of the draw and give them the information treatment. From January the 1st, they are facing this new tax schedule. A couple of months later, we're going to have a new survey where we ask them again about their taxes. And then we will sort of both ask all those who responded in the first survey, but we also include a lot of more people, around 50,000 more people, but only of those who we call compliers, those who ticked the box and got informed. We don't know how many that will be. It's very hard to know. And then, before any data are available, so sometime during January, February, we're going to publish a pre-registration report on how we're going to analyze everything. And then the first results are probably going to be released summer next year. But we don't know. That's not really decided yet, but I think we're going to do that. And then it's going to last for up to 5 years. Yeah, so that's more or less the plan, at least for the first phase of it. And then we'll see. Yes, thank you for the attention.
Thank you. This is super interesting. And we have again two commentators for discussions for this. Kaisa Kotakorpi, who is from the Center of Excellence of Finnish Tax Research, if I'm correct, will be the first. For some reason, that shortcut of that is FIT, but that's another story. But Kaisa, the floor is yours.
Yeah, FI for Finnish and T for taxes. Okay. I mean, it's a easy to pronounce acronym, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So I'm Kaisa.
Stand closer to the mic.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So I'm Kaisa Kotakorpi from Tampere University and FIT. And thanks for the opportunity to discuss this paper and this experiment. I mean, this is extremely fascinating. Yeah, so okay, I mean, I don't have to talk about the pros of doing randomized experiments because that has been covered. So of course, you know, these RCTs proliferated as part of the broader credibility revolution in doing empirical research in economics. But somehow public economics has lagged behind in that development. So RCTs have been more common in other fields of economics, like development economics, education, labor. And well, I guess the main reason or a key reason has been that it has been regarded as unethical, upright, or, you know, categorically not possible to randomize tax rates across people. But okay, some people now have managed to do this, like you guys, or well, not yet, but hopefully we'll soon be able to do this. And I mean, of course, the arguments are that, okay, these potential ethical issues are a cost, but then you argue for the benefits, that, okay, these are potentially very costly policies. So you want to know what their effects are, whether they will be effective in achieving their aims. And then you also have to argue that, okay, a randomized trial is the only way or the best way to do this. And I guess, and this is what you write in your write-up so far, and you explained in your presentation how you did this. And I guess another argument that you could make is, thinking about quasi-experimental designs, whether this question about ethics is really a difference in kind or if it's a difference in degree. So if you think of RD designs, for example, based on age, we always say that that comes very close to randomization. So is this really a difference in kind or is it just a difference in degree? But this is something, it's a folklore that it's always said that you can't randomize tax rates full stop, and it hasn't really happened. I mean, I will give some examples of papers that come close. So, I mean, there have been some RCTs in public economics, but they have concentrated on randomizing tax enforcement parameters, not tax rates themselves, but other features of the tax system, like how likely it is to for people to, or whether people get audited or not. And I guess there the ethical issues have been regarded as being less or smaller, because then the interventions should mainly affect people who have done something illegal. So then, I mean, that's kind of okay, or that's thought of being okay. Okay, hang on, I just need to take some water. Okay, let me just talk about this thing for a second, what has happened in that research. So Matti referred to some of these papers as, information provision experiments. Some of them do more than that. We can discuss that in some other instance. Yeah, so, okay, let's not go into details, but, there are kind of additional pros of doing these randomized experiments, especially regarding enforcement, besides the sort of normal general pros of doing randomized experiments. So one thing is that, okay, tax evasion is something you can't measure in any register data. It's by definition hidden. So then you need some clever research designs to actually find out about evasion. So that's an additional pro of doing experimental research precisely on tax evasion. Okay, one con, I guess, is, and this is not really a con, but something that you need to take care of when you are thinking about randomized experiments on tax enforcement, is that, okay, they give you good identification, but then you have to be careful when you interpret the results, because, for example, audits, when you think about real life audits, they are by their nature an activity that concerns a selected group of taxpayers. So you can't really generalize from the results of randomized audits to if you want to learn about real life audit programs, for example. So there are additional questions there that are kind of interesting. Okay, and there's some citations to reviews of that literature, some Finnish papers in that literature. And some insights we wrote down actually in a paper from our cooperation with the tax administration. Okay, so that's kind of in the background, that this is something that has been happening in public economics regarding randomized controlled trials, but then the key, one of these, well, maybe you can say the key parameter, tax rates, is something that has not been subject to randomization, at least not that much. Okay, here's a figure from Henrik Kleven's set of slides on language trends in public economics, kind of showing how quasi-experiments have proliferated the literature from, I can't see the numbers from here, from earlier on, and then, lab experiments taking up, and then field experiments only much later on. I haven't seen similar figures, you know, I don't know if someone has done this for labor or education, would be interesting to see. Okay, right. So how about then, you know, randomizing tax rates? So there is some literature that comes close to what you are doing. So for example, the Finnish basic income experiment in practice created randomized variation in participation tax rates, even if it's not called, you know, it doesn't say that we are randomizing tax rates, but this is what kind of effectively happens. I don't know if you have discussed this with these people when you designed the experiment. I mean, that would be a good idea, I think. Kari Hämäläinen was here earlier, but I don't see him here anymore. Okay. And I mean, this is regarded as a huge achievement, you know, in research in Finland, and of course attracted a lot of attention internationally. So there's already a series of papers published in very good journals on the experiment. But it was a huge achievement, for example, in passing review of the Constitutional Committee. And, you know, this really paves way for other researchers to be able to do similar stuff in the future. So renewing science in that sense, this is a term that the Research Council of Finland uses for important achievements, renewal of science. Okay, and so then I was just last night reading through the introduction of their papers and, you know, learned, because I mean I share this folklore that no one ever randomized tax rates in any experiment, but so they are citing these very few earlier papers that do similar stuff, like the negative income tax experiments in the US in the 70s, or there has been this program in Canada that comes close also. So this is not like the first one, but there's not much of earlier stuff that has been done. So the current paper, the Norwegian tax cut experiment, this looks like a big and important paper to me when you actually come to do this. So you are going to randomize eligibility to the earned income tax allowance. So again, creating randomized variation in both participation tax rates and the marginal tax rates. Okay, I mean, this is just a couple of random details. I mean, of course, there's a lot more to the experiment. So 8% of taxpayers in this quite wide age bracket are going to be involved. And then, crucially, you combine it with this information treatment. I mean, typically, if you think of information treatments, this is like a heavy information treatment where you actually calculate people's tax rates for them. And give them this information. It's more than, I mean, so it's highly personalized. It's much more than you would do in many kinds of information experiments. So the effect of this allowance on the effective tax rate is going to be salient to the participants if they read what you send them. Right, so what are the kind of big pros of this experiment, I think? So, okay, RCT with randomized variation in tax rates, this is exceptional. It's very large scale, I think, in comparison to many other experiments. It takes place for a relatively long time. So the Finnish basic income experiment was 1 or 2 years, I forget. 2, thanks, Hanna. Okay, and then is it really the case that there's no other restrictions on the target group but the age restriction? Because you always have something like, okay, these strange cases we left out, or this strange area, Åland, or something. I mean, okay, sorry, that's a stupid statement, but often in Finnish cases, you, for some reason, Åland is left out for some data reasons, or something like that. Sorry?
They're not allowed because then it's discriminatory.
Okay, well, that's very good. Okay, then you will measure, I mean, another great thing is that you measure perceptions of tax rates before and after the treatment. This allows a study of both extensive and intensive margin effects on labor supply. I mean, of course, it would give the opportunity to study many other outcomes, like, I don't know, consumption decisions or health outcomes, or, well, you can think of a million things that your disposable income might have an effect on. Well, then you have to think about what you want to pre-register as your main outcomes and so on. Okay, so a lot of very important stuff going on here. Okay, then some questions. So Okay, I mean, tax cut experiment, randomizing tax rates. So of course, then one thinks about whether it matters if you change a tax allowance or the tax rate directly. So okay, these are both ways of changing the effective tax rate, but might have some different effects because of different degrees of salience or how people understand these things. Of course, the information treatment will kind of make this closer to, I mean, or at least makes the tax rate changes salient to people. And okay, this brings me, I guess, to the next discussion. So thinking about the external validity, of course, I mean, this is hugely externally valid in comparison to many other things because it concerns this whole age group, and as you said, there's not these other restrictions, so very sort of generalizable in that sense. On the other hand, in real life, policy changes typically would not be combined with such extensive and personalized information. So, I mean, I don't know, in some sense that's a drawback on the external validity, but in some sense that's also a pro because precisely it takes you closer to having actual tax rate variation. And as you said, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, you don't say that you kind of want to make sure you have some effects. I mean, I guess that's not a sensible starting point for research, but okay. I mean, there are sides to this. I mean, somehow the non-compliers in this treatment group would be of interest to me in a way that they are closest to a real-life situation where the policy changes without an information treatment. Well, this will be a selected group of people who will not read your information. So I guess a separate treatment with only a tax change and no information treatment would be of interest. I mean, of course, you can kind of separate the effects of the information because you have that additional control group as well. But in any way, the effects will be conditional on you having that information. Okay, so in a way, a treatment without any information would have also been of interest. One thing this gets kind of more philosophical, is like, is this a problem with the experiment or is it a problem with the real world? I mean, why don't we provide better information to people about tax rates? I mean, I guess there might be potentially multiple reasons. So costs, if you were giving this service to everybody, calculating their participation tax rates in many different scenarios and sending them this information, I mean, that might be costly. I don't know how much it costs if you already have the framework in place. There's also literature on optimal salience, so it's not obvious that everything should always be fully salient, but okay, this is a big different discussion. Yeah, okay, I mean, this is maybe a minor point, this control group not really being fully business as usual, because they also receive an invitation to log in and find out. And you mentioned these potential disappointment effects that you expect to be minor, but I guess we don't really know. But, well, this is less of a concern now that I hear your description of how this has been handled in the Norwegian, media public discussion. I guess everybody knows about this already. So I don't know if there's a way to avoid kind of everybody being treated somehow. So maybe a bigger thing is this size of the changes in incentives. So I was kind of inclined to think that the change in the participation tax rate is quite small. So in the Finnish basic income experiment, it was really an order of a magnitude bigger. It was huge. I'm bad with numbers, so I won't cite any numbers. Maybe Hanna remembers off the top of her head. But, it reads in their abstract, so you can check. But they were huge, and they still didn't find any effects on labor supply. So, I mean, yeah, I found the incentive changes, at least on that front, pretty small. But, yeah, hard to know. Okay, I think that's all I had. Thanks. Good. But yeah, very, very interesting overall.
Okay, thank you very much, Kaisa. Last discussant of the day will be Helena Keinänen from Finnish Tax Administration. So, Helena, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for the very interesting paper. And yeah, I work at the Finnish tax administration, but my responsibilities do not have anything to do with tax legislation or tax systems. I'm an analyst or working as a service owner there for analysts, and we are responsible for tax gap estimations and efficiency measurements. So I was asked to comment about whether this would be possible in this kind of experiment would be possible in Finland. So I'm sorry, I cannot promise you any kind of answer that it would be, but it's nice to have some kind of how to say imaginary possibilities. What would be the possibilities in Finland and what would be the difficulties. And I present here some comments of our chief analyst, Janna Tuimela and Olavi Tuomi, who is our leading tax specialists. And oh, yeah, sure. That was the green one. Thank you. So in the picture, you see our random tax machine. But I was, I'm the last speaker here, and I must say that you have already used all the possibilities to comment on randomized controlled trials, and I was about to say that, yeah, I can see that they are extremely appealing type of scientific experiments. They are easy to use, easy to analyze, and I see very well why you would be interested to use these in this kind of context as well. But maybe we can jump a bit over of these comments. Yes, I understand that, of course, that there's always the cost side of these trials, and in this case, it seems to be quite a large one, quite a remarkable one. So, but also, when you're talking about the cost of an experiment, you should think about the positive side too. I mean, here the groups, they consist of young people, so probably the way that you get them to work in an early phase of their life makes the positive cost side much better than otherwise. But what I think that if you are implementing or if you are thinking about re-implementing such a trial in Finland, maybe you could, I mean, with such a high cost, you could think about, how to put it, try to achieve even more information out of it. Now you're just testing one kind of a tax curve. Why not in the same time testing several ones? If you're already randomizing people, then do it even. I mean, you are already doing big, but if you redo it, do it even bigger, and then try to find more information from this trial. Well, yes. About these randomized trials, well, they are nice and easy. They are already used in FDA. We use them a lot. For example, one place where we use them are information campaigns. We have several campaigns per year we are measuring. And we are doing this because, well, it's not a news for anyone that we have very limited resources. So if, for example, we are putting a large number of working hours for information campaign where we call, for example, for new customers, we want to be sure that when we implement such a campaign, the outcomes are exactly what we want to. Or then we need to change or reverse what we are doing. We don't do any kind of academic study, but and we don't publish our efficiency measurements. But here's two publicly reported examples. First of them.
Sorry, do you need to change the slide?
Thank you.
There we go.
Sorry, please. Thank you, said. So here's 2 examples of these. Perhaps those working at VAT already are familiar with the first one. It's carried out together with you a couple of years ago. And the second one is a kind of efficiency of nudging project where this randomization is also used. But as the academic research is really not our job, and we cannot, neither is our job to, as appealing it is it not to promote that kind of work. What is the duties of a Finnish tax administration? That comes from the Act on the Tax Administration, and very simply, it comes from the second section. And my apologies, this is my own translation, and this is certainly not the official one, but I didn't find the official translation in English, but I hope you get a point from here anyway. The first bullet states that our most important duty is to implement the taxation. Then we collect the payments and we take care of the supervision and guidance of the customers. That's very simple. But there's a third bullet also, which is important here, that we may carry out investigations or trials or other duties. So it is possible for us to do that kind of experiments, but only if it's told for us by the Ministry of Finance, or if there is a specific law or regulation for it. So, according to the Act on Tax Administration, we could reproduce the Norwegian experiment if the ministry assigns it for us to do, or if there is a new law. But since we know, all Finnish know very well that there is not too much public money right now, there should be some extra funding for this. And for sure there are many other important tests or trials that could be also done in the same time. And it's a choice of a policy, which is the one that will be implemented. So the gatekeeper is not Finnish Tax Administration, it's the ministry. And so the appropriate authority to discuss this is also the Ministry of Finance. I was also told by our specialists that the Constitution of Finland might be some kind of raise a problem here with RTCs. And actually the Norwegian paper enlightens a little bit of that, but I think what I could imagine, you got it quite easily through of this, and I would be very glad to hear more how you did it, because well, somebody here said today that okay, there are NCTs done all the time in medicine. Yes, but we are not talking about here about people's chances to live or live a healthy life. I used to be a philosopher, so I don't take that kind of argument as a valid argument. We are talking about giving more money to some people than more than to others, and that's totally different thing than medicine, and that cannot be talking at the same time. But I think randomization is such a powerful method that you cannot avoid randomization, but could you perhaps avoid the inequality that follows from randomization? In some cases, for example, The deviation from the equality principle has been possible. Kaisa already mentioned what was that basic income experiment, that perhaps in English the right term. Also, I know that, for example, now I'm talking about medicine, but sometimes you randomize several times people, so more people can get the possibility or the access to the benefit or to the good one. Then it's less, it's always, of course, unequal for those who don't get the access to the control group, but maybe less bad. And ultimately, in the end of the experiment, if you give the possibility to all of the age group, for example, for some time, for some period, to this smaller lower tax rate, maybe that could be one way to make it less unequal. Still, if it comes to the point that you would repeat this trial in Finland, what would it require? Well, first of all, as I already said, you need to change the legislation, or you need an assignment from the ministry, and you need the money, enough money to implement the changes to our tax system. And in the picture, yes, that's our taxing system. It's quite a complicated one. It needs a lot of testing. You should first make system modifications, because it's not that there is a tax officer who takes a pile of paper and taxes them differently. You have to change the whole system to make that kind of thing possible. You should do all the kind of testing and plannings, and they are not done in-house in Finnish tax administration. They are both outside as a consult work. That's not a cheap project. And lastly, you should have some kind of post-experimental functionality. You should remember that not only those modifications should be there during the 5 years you are making this kind of trial, but also years after that, since the customers can request for corrections for the taxation also during several years. And also you should have money for the reversal changes too, so that you get the experimental modifications. They must be also dismantled. But in overall, this is a fascinating idea that you could try this, and I get several ideas how you could, for example, use this data to check whether this has any kind of effects on, for example, compliance of the customers. It would be nice to see if getting a lower tax rate would make them happier taxpayers too. Thank you.